It was a cold February evening when I pulled up to pick up my fiancée, Cheryl. As she got into the car, I said to her what I had only recently admitted to myself. I just can't believe in God anymore. Cheryl and I were both religion majors at the university we attended, or the college at the time, Northwest Nazarene. We had just previously gotten engaged. I'd asked her to marry me and she'd said yes. We had planned to graduate in May, get married in August, and then go into pastoral ministry. But now, I no longer believed in God. Now, I'm not the kind of person who took my faith lightly. In fact, I was the kind of person you probably don't like to talk to very often. I was a fanatic witnessing person. I'd gone to practically every house in the neighborhood around the college, knocked on the door and said, "Hi, I'm Tom. Let me tell you about Jesus Christ." I went to the city streets of Boise, if Boise's a city, and talked to people on the sidewalks about Jesus. I was a part of Campus Crusade for Christ. I used to have the 4 spiritual laws memorized. I was someone who took my faith very seriously, and everybody on campus, or virtually everyone, knew that I was a Christian and committed to following God. But that semester, I had encountered really good arguments from smart atheists, agnostics, people from other religious traditions, and their arguments upended my reasons for faith in God. In fact, for the sake of intellectual honesty, I had to say it didn't make sense anymore. I couldn't be a theist. Now, a lot of people abandon faith. I'm not the first person to become an atheist, but the reasons they have are different from mine. Some people give up believing in God because they have been hurt by those in the church or those who say they're doing God's will. And they say, if that's what God's will is, I want nothing to do with God. Other people give up faith because it's a rebellious kind of a thing. They're rebelling against their parents or society or their friends. Some people give up faith, I think, as a kind of a shock value thing. They want to make a statement, make a stand, be known. Some folks give up faith, I think, because they no longer want to follow the do's and don'ts of their youth, and they want to give up a moral code, and giving up belief in God seems the way to do that. But for me, and for many people like me, it was an intellectual thing. I just could not find reasons to believe that God exists. Now, I wasn't an atheist for very long. I returned to faith. I was a person who decided that answering the biggest questions was something I wanted to do with my life. I persisted in my quest to make sense of God and reality. Not that I understand God fully at all. But for me, it was important to keep on the journey. And my efforts to find faith in God again really came down to 2 ideas, 2 things that brought me back to believing it was more plausible than not that God exists. The first one is that I could not find meaning in life if there wasn't some kind of ground for meaning, if there wasn't a God who existed who was the source of making sense of life. There's lots of questions in life, and I certainly don't have all the answers. But if there is no God, it's really hard for me to make sense of what my life ought to be, how I ought to act, and what's the purpose of things. Secondly, and my clicker might not be working, there we go. I came to believe that God exists fundamentally to make sense of my deep intuitions about love. I had a deep sense that I ought to love other people and that they ought to love me and others. And it made no sense to me why I had this deep intuition if there wasn't some kind of a being who was the ground or basis of this intuition and the model for what love looks like. In fact, I might put it this way. Love led me back to God. So in this quest to find my basis for belief in God, I came from a perspective that thought that questioning and doubt and uncertainty were what people did who just weren't very mature. the babes in Christ. They had questions. But if you really had things figured out, well, then you were mature and you had no questions whatsoever. I came, however, to believe that while it's more plausible than not that God exists, I could not know this with absolute certainty. In fact, I find a statement from Phineas F. Bresee especially helpful. Bresee once said, "Faith isn't the absence of doubt, it's choosing to act despite your doubt." We who are Christians are believers. We're not certainers, to coin a word tonight. In fact, I get kind of worried sometimes when people say that they're absolutely certain that God exists. I get kind of worried because those same people often act or say things that make me think they've also got God completely figured out. I mean, it would make no sense to say you know with absolute certainty God exists and then say, but I'm not really sure who God is. Right? That wouldn't make sense. But the problem with thinking you've got God figured out and knowing it with absolute certainty is that you tend to then be tempted to be prideful. You tend to think of other people who don't have your view as somehow less than you, and you ridicule their particular perspective. I think this idea of absolute certainty about our belief in God is something we should set aside. But I'm not advocating what I think is the opposite, which is blind faith. That's the idea that you have no evidence or arguments whatsoever, and you just say, yep, God exists, and I don't have to tell you why, just I said it, therefore that settles it. I think there's a position between blind faith and absolute certainty that makes a lot more sense, and I'm calling it plausible religion, or fundamental trust, or reasonable belief. It's that middle position I think we can hold and still have confidence, but also humility. And that's what I want to advocate tonight. I'm telling you the little story about my life for a particular reason. I believe that we must embrace doubt, uncertainty. We must search for the best answers to the biggest questions of life that we have. In fact, we're here tonight on a campus of students who have come here for an education. And they're coming to this university for an education is not just to add extra knowledge, it's also to rethink and reconceptualize and redo some of the ways they think about their world, including some of the ideas they've been given by their culture, by their parents and grandparents, by their Sunday school teacher, by their youth pastor. I have a colleague at my university, and she's a chemistry teacher. And at the beginning of the first year for her first youngest students of chemistry, she likes to start class by saying this: everything you learned about chemistry in high school is wrong. The students typically don't bat an eye because they figure I'm here at college, they must have something to teach me, and they just go right with her. A few years ago, she dared me. She said, "Tom, I dare you to start your first year theology classes by saying, everything you learned about God in Sunday school is wrong." I'm wise enough not to take her up on that kind of dare. Now, of course, the truth is that not everything students learn in high school chemistry is wrong, and not everything students learn in Sunday school about God is wrong. But we have to rethink some of the ideas we hold dear if we're going to make better sense out of life. And that's what I want to urge tonight. I want to promote the idea that we allow space for students on this campus and other campuses to come to believe differently than we do. Space for them to ask questions, to have real doubts, to be uncertain. And not just students on this campus. I find that in local churches, local communities, in my family, in friendships, there's also people who are asking big questions, who have doubts, who have changed their views about who God is. Tonight, I also want to urge us to allow space for those kinds of people. And finally tonight, I want to ask you to allow space in your own life for questions. I want you to recognize the validity, in fact, the positivity of the fact that you don't have everything figured out, and that you're also on a journey to understand what it means to know God, to love God, and to be a follower of Jesus Christ in this world. Tonight, I want to urge you to be uncertain. Not to be on a foundationless kind of approach to life. You can still have deep convictions. You can still have plausibility. But to allow yourself, your community, and the students on this campus to ask questions so that they can know their faith like you know your own. Thank you.